Barnaby Jones will return next Thursday night at 10, 9 Central and Mountain on most of these stations.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. This episode of Word Balloon is brought to you by Ithacon. April 5th and 6th at Emerson Suites on the Ithaca College campus in Ithaca, New York. Saturday, April 5th and Sunday, April 6th. Ticket prices are $25 with kids admission free. Tickets are available at ithacon.org. That's ITHACON.org. Among the guests, Don McGregor of Black Panther fame, Chris Condon, featured in Ultimate Wolverine and Green Arrow, Matt Bors from Ahoy's Toxic Avenger, Mike Gold, known for Green Arrow, Warlord, and Wasteland, and the legendary Louise and Walter Simonson. There'll be cosplay, gaming, and kids' activities. And Ithacon is offering swag bags for the first 250 attendees that buy tickets. These overstuffed swag bags offer $20 to $50 values in comic books and more. Come see all the fun at Ithacon April 5th and 6th at Emerson Suites on the Ithaca College campus in Ithaca, New York. For more details and tickets, come to ithacon.org. Dennis Kitchen, welcome to Word Balloon. Man, it's been a while since our first conversation, but I'm thrilled that you have this new documentary project and a new book.
Well, thank you, John. It's not my film, I'm the subject of it, but but yes, there is the next book coming up is actually a 3D book of the kind of creatures I draw on chipboard. Some of your viewers might have seen, it's called Creatures from the Subconscious. It came from Tinto Press, I think a year and a half or so ago. Or the kind of drawings I post on Instagram, I'm converting to 3D, and Fantagraphics will be collecting it in a format similar to they did a Jim Woodring Frank book in 3D that was great. So yeah, it's all fun.
It's always fun, Dennis. I mean, really, your body of work and your excellent work in the counterculture, but also creating the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. I'm so thankful for that, Dennis. I just turned 60. You'll forgive me, but
I call that a kid, John.
It's all relative. I respect that, but
Yeah.
I grew up in that Watergate generation, and I really thought we were beyond the stuff we're seeing today with book banning still a problem and stuff. Now, as someone, again, forgive me, with someone older and stuff, it's gotta suck that we're still in this like stupid funk.
Yeah, it's I learned a long time ago that you can't just create something like the CBLDF and make censorship go away. It's an ongoing battle. I don't think it's ever going to end. So we just do our best to put out fires and win what battles we can.
Well, and again, that's why I'm glad you're still out there on the front lines and stuff. And give me the perspective of truly when did you start Kitchen Sink Press?
1969.
That's great, man. Yeah, that's excellent. And I really became aware of you when you were working with Will Eisner and doing the Spirit Quarterly, of course. But again, that was well more than a decade after you had started Kitchen Sink Press. In our previous conversation, you talked about how you just see this unfairness of comic creators not being able to own their own stuff? I mean, why did you start the company?
Well, You have to remember, I began as a cartoonist, and I still like to think that's my number one description, but I really was a publisher for over 30 years, and that that was essentially a full-time job. But as a cartoonist entering the field, it was quickly apparent that if you wanted to work for one of the major companies like Marvel or DC or Archie or whoever else was around then, you had to do it on a work for hire basis. They would own everything you created. They would own your artwork. Don't expect it back. You'd get one check, typically a flat rate amount. It wouldn't matter how many they printed, how many languages it might be translated into, all of that. So I just remember thinking, I don't want to do that. There has to be a better way. And the only better way was to self publish, which is, you know, usually means small press, very tiny distribution, and you're lucky a few friends and relatives see it. But I was lucky enough that when I entered the field, it was when the counterculture was growing, and that counterculture was built around primarily the anti-Vietnam War movement, but other what I like to call the burning issues of the day: women's rights, gay rights, civil rights, legalized pot, you name it. And so all of these things, a generation of mostly long-haired hippies coalesced around. And we also had a thing developing at that same time called head shops, where hippies could go, yeah, buy their rolling papers and Dayglow posters and whatnot. So they were the ideal way to get entree. And so I developed a distribution system with that as the cornerstone, and it was remarkably efficient. And we sold tons of underground comics back then. And that allowed us then to create our own business model. And as soon as I became aware that I was quickly becoming a publisher more than an artist, I resolved basically to apply the golden rule. It's just as simple as that. I wanted to treat other artists the way I wanted to be treated.
That's amazing. And again, isn't that ridiculous that it is so matter of fact? Like, hey, is it asking too much that you own your own stuff and that you get
Yeah,
back your pages?
it's
And
kind of a big dot. Now I would put an asterisk on that because honestly, if I was going to go work for, say, Marvel and say write Spider-Man or something, of course they own Spider-Man.
sure,
So you have to understand they own their trademarks and their copyrighted material for a reason. But outside of the big companies who own these, franchise characters, there's really no reason you can't own what you create. To me, the real model is the literary world. I mean, authors going back, as far as you want, automatically owned novels that they wrote. And why wouldn't a graphic novel be different than a text novel? It just was the way the businesses grew. And because comic books were a relatively new phenomenon, starting in the mid 30s, roughly, there were no precedents other than, periodicals kind of had their own rules. And also the fact that the comic book companies, with very few exceptions, were run by real sharks.
I
And,
was gonna,
you know,
yeah.
the last thing they wanted to do was share the revenue and the rights.
I don't think people realize that unless they really follow comic book history, that yeah, before what became DC Comics was in the comic book business, they were doing like kind of is it fair to say softcore porn for that period?
Well, it was, yeah, I think that risque
All
magazines,
right, yeah,
like Donenfeld, who took over DC from Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, who really
yes,
started the company.
yes,
Donenfeld and his partner Leibowitz, they were sons of bitches.
yeah,
They screwed the Major, and
yeah.
they screwed Siegel and Schuster and anybody else. That was the way they did business. So he started out doing schlocky, like, yeah, girly magazines.
Spicy Detective, I know, was a title that I think
Yeah.
they published. Were there big publishers that when you started you wanted to work for? Can you name like a Dell or a Western or a DC or Marvel that you're like, oh hey, well, hire me?
Well, I can't say I knocked on the door of Dell, no, but the rules would have been the same. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember one of my favorite comics growing up was Little Lulu. Well, it took years to find out that, yeah, you understand. A guy named John Stanley was one of the geniuses behind that, but who knew? He was like Karl Barks. They were anonymous. They couldn't even sign their own work. How crappy is that? But Dell was selling the brand. They were selling you Little Lulu or Uncle Scrooge or whatever they wanted you hooked on the character. They didn't want fanboys going, "Oh, this guy draws better than that guy," or "I love that writer." That wasn't in their best interests. From what I understand, they didn't even forward Karl Barks's fan mail to him. He worked in total anonymity. It's like these people were awful.
I know the story that when Jim Aparo finally went to San Diego Comic Con, the great Batman artist, he started
Mhm.
crying because people were applauding, and he's like, "I was in front of my draft board all that time. I had no idea I had so many hundreds, if not thousands, of fans." So it's great that,
Yeah.
thank God, at least at the end, he got a little bit of that. But again, it took people like you that it's like, no, no, no.
Mhm.
Especially if you created something, you should own it, and we're going to give you the opportunity to publish. The head shops, were they cool right away and like, yeah, sure, we'll sell this next to the rolling papers.
Yeah, absolutely. The head shops were really natural partners. Um, I mean, again, you fall into cliches quickly when you're trying to describe that time, but it was a very different time. And I consider myself lucky that I was coming of age when there was that option, because otherwise, you're kind of stuck with the system that there is. You rarely have an opportunity to upend it and start a new business model that actually, gets traction.
I'm excited to see this documentary, and oddly compelling, the Dennis Kitchen story. There's a Kickstarter campaign for it, and rightfully so.
Well, I should point out it's in the pre-launch stage right now. They're waiting until I think 400 people hit the button. So if any of your listeners are interested, go there and I think it says notify me on launch or something like that.
Yeah,
So the
I'm looking.
sooner we get 400, the sooner it'll be live.
As we're recording, Dennis's documentary is at 262. So yeah,
Okay.
let's hit 400 so this thing can get going and get the support that it absolutely deserves. Dennis, your contemporaries and even the guys that were older than you that you had the opportunity to work with, I'm curious about your observations of them. Certainly, I got to start with Eisner because again, I think after that period, I became aware of Eisner during the Warren years of the
Sure.
Spirit. But then it was your magazine that really was like, oh man, thank God we're even getting more. And was there a couple years gap between when you were publishing and when Warren was
Well,
publishing?
well, again, memories play tricks. The I actually published The Spirit before Warren. I
Oh,
did I did two. They're called The Underground Spirit. And Jim Warren saw them and he went to Will and he said, "Hey, I can sell a lot more spirits than that rinky dink organization." And, and it was true because he had newsstand distribution. So where I was doing maybe 10 or 20,000 print runs, he was doing 100 to 200,000. And so I remember he talked to Will and Will called me and he said, Dennis, I hope you understand. I have, basically been offered a deal I can't refuse. But he said, "Don't worry, we'll do some more business in the future." And of course, it worked out. So Warren did, I think, 16 magazines, and then when that ended, for reasons that are still a mystery to me, I think they had a falling out, but Will never talked about it. Um, so I did it from I think 17 to 41, and then we split it into a complete comic book series, and then Will Eisner Quarterly. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff with Will. He was so prolific. It took a long time to run out of material.
The guy was drawing literally till the end. I know
Yeah.
that, and I love that about him, and I love that about Joe Kubert as well with his excellent comics, and was so power. Kubert was so powerful at the end too. What kind of guy was Eisner?
You know, I cannot stress enough what a gentleman he was. He was always fair in any business dealings. I remember once mildly complaining to him about a contract, and my profit margin was pretty squeezed. And he said, "You know what?" He said, "Let's rewrite it then." He said, "It's not a good contract unless both of us are happy." And I remember thinking, who else would do that? Um, and he was just the sweetest man in general. If he went to a comic convention, he would talk to anyone. He didn't just hang out with his old friends or publishers or bigwigs. I remember walking through San Diego Comic Con with him one year, and we were in a big hurry. I think we had to get to a panel on the opposite side, and that can take forever grinding through the crowd. And a young boy recognized him and stopped him and said, "Mr. Eisner, can I have your autograph?" And I was like looking at my watch, and I was like, "Will, we got to run." So he not only took the time to sign, he asked this young fellow, some questions. They chatted for a few minutes, and I'm like, "Will, we're going to be late." And he didn't care. For him, it was more important at that moment to be nice to a young fan. And he knew whatever we were going to, they would wait another couple of minutes. He just was a good person.
That's terrific. I got to meet
And
him.
yeah,
Go ahead. Excuse me. I didn't mean to.
I
I
was
didn't
going
mean
to say, I can't say that about all cartoonists because they're cartoonists are as flawed as any other human being. But yeah, he was a special guy.
Back in 2000, about 5 years before I started my podcast, he came to the University of Chicago and did a humanities festival,
Right.
and it was great. It was in this like college atmosphere, and after we sat in this 300 seat auditorium, he was in the lobby, and I brought up a couple of my Warren spirits, and could not have been nicer. So I
Sure.
I know that, and also the various creators that I know that had the opportunity of getting their Eisner handed to them by Will during the Eisner Awards was a big thing for them, and that he was excited about
Yeah,
the new people and the new things that people were drawing.
absolutely. It was a key word about him was he was always curious about new talent, new publications, new developments in technology, um, new wrinkles in distribution, anything. Um, he never stopped. He even when I was his publisher and other people were his publishers, he continued for a long time to publish his educational books himself, not because he had to, but because it kept a foot in what was going on. It it was important to him to have that toe firsthand in the business, and you know, and he never stopped, as you indicated. He was at the drawing board until literally the day he had to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
Um, so so yeah, it's a great role model in many ways. I People sometimes ask me when I'm retiring, and I you know I I'm already slowing down, but I can't imagine retiring because for me, Will was the role model.
Well, we don't want you to retire, honestly, Dennis,
Mm.
and truly, both, whatever you want to do as far as cartooning and whatever. Who were your inspirations when you were starting? Who were the guys you're like, I want to do what they do?
Huh. Well, Harvey Kurtzman was certainly one. Um, Growing up, Mad and Humbug and his other satire magazines, those were really, for me, crucial to my cultural development. Um, he was like the ultimate satirist. And another guy like Will, who was kind of self-effacing and kind of an aw shucks guy when you met him, but unbelievably talented and crucial. to the, say, the maturation of comics. um, there were certainly others. I didn't deliberately emulate anyone, but I mean, growing up, when I was hooked on comics, I think probably the cartoonist I admired the most was Al Cap, because I love Little Abner, and I would see Al Cap on TV all the time. Later, when I found out more about him, I realized as a person, he had definite shortcomings, but I never stopped admiring him as a cartoonist. And it's just like a number of people in the popular culture. You may not be happy with their personal life, but what they created is very worthy. And he was a prime example to me. Um, but, almost everything I read when I was young was influential in one way or another. And I'm glad I had eclectic tastes. I wasn't just reading the superheroes like a lot of my friends in the neighborhood was. I like the funny stuff, like we talked about Little Lulu and
Karl
Uncle
Marx.
Scrooge, and
Yeah, yeah.
and to the degree there were educational comics and just funny comics in general. I love the best of all of them. And if it hadn't been for that, I wouldn't have discovered like the Basil Wolvertons and the really weird stuff. Uh, or the horror comics, the ones that kind of were creepy and might give you a nightmare, but you couldn't put them down.
I honestly envy you in terms of being there for those EC years when they were brand new, and that era of comics. And I'm glad you mentioned Al Cap. The last time you and I talked, we talked about the biography of Cap that you didn't you co-write that? Am I
Yeah,
remembering
yeah,
correctly? Man,
yeah,
what an eye-opening thing! And truly, you're right, because there's a guy that, as we learned about his personal life, it's shocking. In a sadly, if people don't know who haven't heard our previous interview or aren't aware of the biography, in a sadly Bill Cosby kind of sense, the guy really was a predator.
yeah. Look, we could talk about him for an entire show, but I don't know how many of your listeners would care because if you're of a certain age, you probably don't even know the name. And
True, but
but he was like the biggest name in comics.
that literally, honestly, Dennis, I've been talking to people from Peanuts lately,
Yeah.
and Al Cap had that Charles Schultz level of national recognition. I've found old radio shows where he is a charming and delightful panelist, and
Yep.
I've seen those Dick Cavett episodes from the early '70s when he kind of turned on your generation, man. I would imagine he
Oh
started
yeah.
as a hero with you guys, and then
Yeah.
Free Love, am I right? Kind of turned him off and asked all you guys to
Well,
get a haircut and a shower, basically.
yeah, I think he resented that he thought hippies were getting free love. And that's another, um yeah, he was resentful and he didn't like, well, again, we could go off on a tangent, but I don't think too
Yeah.
many of your listeners would care.
Well, again, I do like to talk about comic history, and I do appreciate the detour. But back to you. Yeah, Kurtzman again. Well, like, how were those guys when you were studying? How was Kurtzman? Did you ever publish any of Harvey
Oh yeah.
stuff?
Oh yeah. I reprinted a lot of his things like Hey Look and Goodman Beaver and
Cool.
uh I know I'm forgetting something. And then about a dozen years ago, I did a book called The Art of Harvey Kurtzman for Abrams, which was, a big coffee table book. That was
Sure.
a huge, huge pleasure. And I represented Harvey, and I still represent his estate. Um, so just like Will Eisner, I got to know
Yes.
some of these people well enough that as they got older and passed away, the families would ask me to help them. So that's been a great honor, just helping keeping their legacy alive.
Are they, because I know Fantagraphics certainly has had their time reprinting things like that. You mentioned Abrams, obviously. I know Clover Press is out there. How do you gauge the business now for these formative guys? I mean, nothing lasts forever, and we are
Right.
generation. God, you may have even heard Warner Brothers is flirting with the idea of selling off Looney Tunes.
I just saw that. Yeah.
Isn't that
Well,
shocking? Yeah.
they should. If they don't know what to do with it and they're that stupid, sell it to somebody who loves those characters,
Yeah.
Really. Warner Brothers is one of those huge effed up organizations that's too big for its own good. And honestly, I hope to God they do find a buyer who appreciates it.
I'm with you, man. No, I really want to see this new movie before it leaves the theaters and stuff. And I applaud the company that bought the movie off them. And they're like, "Oh, we'll put it out." But no, I get what you're saying. But it is weird. And again, I appreciate the comic history. I know that a lot of my viewers and listeners also appreciate comic history. But again, very few things, past
Yeah.
the century mark and are still relevant.
Yeah. Well, look, even Disney. Why is there no full-length Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck animated feature anymore? Even shorts. I mean, once in a great while they'll revive them for some anniversary, but these are the characters that are synonymous with the brand, and yet they don't have anybody clever enough to write some contemporary stories around these characters. I mean, I don't get it. But then,
But it seems like the Europeans do still make new things with some of
oh
these
yeah,
characters.
I mean, like Donald Duck's as big as ever in places in Europe like Germany and Scandinavia in particular, Italy. I know some of the cartoonists. I've met
Wow.
like Ulrich Schroeder and Dan Yips, I think it's pronounced, and Evert Geratz. These are amazing cartoonists, and I personally prefer that they do their own work, their own characters, but
Sure.
they make a living working for Disney, and they're doing remarkable stuff that just won't find an audience here when there were occasionally, and not that long ago, efforts to reprint some of the classic Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge in America, and it's a small audience. It's like, to me, collections of Uncle Scrooge and all this classic stuff, it should be in the, the Barnes and Noble's kids department, where every mother or father going in there buys the Uncle Scrooge stories for the kid. The same way, if you're in Europe, you're given a Tintin when you're a kid, and it's multi-generational. What, but again, I
I
don't want to
I
kvetch all the show, but it drives me batty that they don't do the obvious. They don't know what treasures they're sitting on, because I think the people who run it are clueless. They're not comics fans,
true.
and they're not willing to listen to people who might give them some good advice. And again, you can't just drop them. You got to, market them and put some advertising money behind it, but
Absolutely.
they are truly timeless. So there's more people, reading Tom Sawyer probably than Uncle Scrooge. And why is that? Why aren't they both timeless?
I'm so with you. And again, I'm as the analogy goes, I'm with you on the porch yelling at clouds, Dennis.
Well,
Even though I'm
let's
a
take over,
little
John.
younger.
Let's take over.
Hey,
And
I'm with you. Oh
all
no,
right.
for God's sakes, absolutely, man. Hopefully people with more money than us are listening, throw money at these things and these things can continue. How about Dennis, we didn't talk about this last time, I don't believe. Um the explosion of digital comics and how has its impact been on the genres that you brought forward with your underground efforts?
Well, I can't really analyze it because I haven't done a deep dive in there. I have
Okay,
nothing against digital comics. I mean, it's not my preferred manner of reading them, but if it reaches more people, I'm all for reading. I don't care if it's electronic or paper.
sure.
But I do think it benefits contemporary comics more, because a lot of the creators are designing their comics specifically for the digital format, so automatically format fits easier and whatnot.
Sure.
Um, I'm not so sure, it's the best way to say reread,
Uncle
Milton
Scrooge.
Caniff or Al
Yeah,
Cap or
yeah,
something. And
sure.
to me, those the audience for that stuff is kind of small anyway. So I think paper editions probably make the most sense. But anybody who's a publisher in that vein, I presume they're trying all kinds of things, and nothing should be exempt from that format.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I often think if the timeline, is the timeline you're born into and whatever. But I know Kitchen Sink was coming apart just as the internet was taking off, and we didn't quite make it to having a viable website or taking advantage of like you say, telling stories digitally. Um, so I'm envious in a way of the new generation. At the same time, it is what it is. Um, you know, I'm just glad there's more options than ever because in theory there is more readers.
And you do see it that way. That's good because that was my wondering. Again, given that you were, for the longest time dealing with the counterculture, then Kitchen Press did manage to, be mainstream. Plus, as you say, your stewardship of the estates of Kurtzman and Eisner and guys like that, and thankfully, I'm really glad DC, 20 years ago or whenever it was, realized the value of the Spirit and Eisner, and all of a sudden we were getting
Yeah,
that new
no,
stuff.
all credit to Paul Levitz who did that Spirit Library. I think there were 26 volumes, as I recall. That was a big investment, and a lot of people were grateful. Um, but again, as you said, I think that was around the turn of the century.
Yep,
So finding those now, it's tough to put together a set. They're not cheap. Even when they were new, they were, I think, $50 a volume. So that was
that's
like
right.
$1,800 investment. And now, I don't know what it would be.
And that's the thing. I remember when, and now I'm blanking on whoever was reprinting EC in the it might have been the Diamond guy.
Or
Uh,
Russ
Jem,
Cochran.
oh yeah, maybe, well, Russ, but and beyond the coffee
Oh,
table books,
Gemstone, maybe.
Gemstone, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
When Gemstone was putting out, regular monthly comic book size stuff, and I mean that's the thing is, it's one thing to, again, a high end collector is willing to spend $100 today on a nice coffee table book of Eisner or you name it, Kurtzman or somebody like that. But it is a shame that there's not a more monthly kind of smaller investment that we can appreciate this stuff in that form. How do you feel about that?
Well, again, I love some of those big, like the artist editions,
Oh yeah,
IDW, and some others
sure.
were doing. My partner John and I put a toe in the waters there too. With we did a big Frank Miller Sin City book and had some others on the drawing board. But as a collector, I love it. I had to have a carpenter come and build me a special bookshelf for them, but such is the price, right? But again, I'm at a stage where I have probably more disposable income than the average young fan. So it's got to be tough to go to a show and see one of these big books and, pulling out a credit card for $125 or whatever
Yeah.
and lugging it home and finding a place to put it when you don't really have a lot of space. It's tough, I I don't know what to say to people in that position other than be patient, and you'll eventually find your copies used and hopefully in nice condition. Um, but you cannot produce big books like that cheaply. The cost of production just keeps going up. The cost of paper, everything, everything. So, I mean, you're talking to a guy who when he was a kid paid 10 cents for a comic book, and now it's $4 or $5 for a comic book that's
Yeah.
what, a third advertising. It's
Yeah.
I wish there were a cheaper format that could be supported. It wouldn't even maybe have to have slick covers. Just do it on cheaper paper, self-contained. Just get it out there for a couple of bucks or, 250, whatever you can make a decent profit on. But you can't expect people to pay $5 every week for the 20 or 30 or 40 books they want. It just gets too expensive.
I'm with you, Dennis.
You
And
know,
then
which gets
truly,
back to, then, well, they can probably find it digitally, cheaper or sometimes free.
it
And that,
depends, Dennis. Sometimes they charge the same amount of money for the digital book as they do the paper book.
yeah, and
You
that's
know,
crazy. That's
I
crazy.
agree with that too, man. No, no. By the way, if you ever want to drop a few swear words, you're allowed. It's
Yeah,
we're not bound by the seven dirty words like
yeah,
the FCC. Don't worry about it.
yeah. I don't mind buying paper. I don't like buying electrons. That's
No, I understand. I totally get that. You're absolutely right. I always thought it would make sense to get back to newsrag, if that's the right term for the old-fashioned paper. I mean, I really appreciated in the '80s when they were going to more quality paper and stuff, both for the magazine format and, of course, the trades and the hardbacks of books as well. But yeah, I'm like, and also these were, pulp fiction was the precursor to the comic world, and it just seemed to fit on that kind of cheap paper as
yeah.
well. I mean, I was a 20 cent a month comic
Okay.
book kid, not
That's
too
why I
far.
call you the kid, right?
I
That's
understand. I understand, but no, you're right, man. They're $5 an
yeah,
issue, and it's like, yeah, I don't know, man. 20 pages of story for $5. Especially when you have the different entertainment options that we now have compared to
absolutely.
what we grew up
Yeah,
with, man. Yeah.
absolutely. And that's why most kids these days they're into electronic games or something else where the bang for the buck is much bigger,
Yep.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, I worry about our medium because it's going to price itself out of the market.
Yeah, it's becoming fringy. I know what you mean. And especially again the genres that you published and tell me about Howard Cruz. A wonderful
Yep,
creator in the gay genre, and I saw him a couple times at the Chicago Tribune Printers Row book fair and everything, and got
yep.
to see him in action before he passed. Cool guy.
Terrific creator. Yep. If any of your listeners aren't familiar with him or haven't read his work, they should pick up Stuck Rubber Baby, which was his masterpiece.
Yeah.
Um, it was reissued just a couple of years ago, I think the 20th anniversary edition. Um, and he did amazing stuff for the undergrounds too. Not all of it's easily available, but definitely a great talent. Passed away too early.
Is there an underground today? I mean, I go to Chicago comics. You're a Wisconsin guy, right? Or you were?
Yeah, originally, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I go to Chicago comics a lot in the city. I don't live about 15 minutes away from it. And thank God there is still that great underground and foreign sections and stuff. And I mean, that's really like a full service comic store. And I can appreciate some of the others that really do focus only on Marvel. I mean, God, it was eye opening when I used to go to Diamond Summits and I'd meet store owners that all they carried was Marvel. That's it. Not even DC, only Marvel and stuff. But
Yep.
yeah, I mean, so is there still a publishing or a physical market for the underground genres, or what were underground genres?
Well, not that are called undergrounds.
Sure.
Every generation, I mean, even when we called underground comics underground, to me, the term refers to something that's illegal. It's under the counter, and you have to ask and say the secret word, because
Sure.
it's like contraband. So we were sold openly. Underground was just a way to distinguish it from mainstream comics, and the fact
Right.
that we didn't have to deal with the restrictions they did, and the content was sometimes naughty and political and drugs and whatnot. But I'm not aware that anybody today still calls themselves an underground cartoonist. I might be wrong, but you always have stuff on the edge. And I like to go to the small shows that are mostly the small press self-publishers like SPX, Mocha, Mice, those kinds of
Oh
shows.
yeah.
And there's so many varieties, and some of those, I mean, I think are kindred spirits. I see them as the children or grandchildren of underground comics because what we have in common is they say whatever they want. They have no restrictions. They take on any topic. Sometimes they get loud and angry and naughty, and so we're kindred spirits. But I don't think they call themselves underground, and it's a different format. I adopted the old slick four-color cover, and for us, most of the time, a black and white interior.
Yes.
And most small press outfits these days can't really afford full color covers, or or for whatever reason they don't want to mimic that format, so they tend to be odd size, whatever. But they're still, I relate to them. I feel like they're second cousins or whatever.
No, I get it. Absolutely,
Yeah.
man. We have Cake in Chicago every June, and that's a great small press show as
I
well.
haven't been to that one.
Oh man, oh shit! If I find out you're coming to town, I'm definitely going to see you. I haven't been to the New York show in a while, just logistically and stuff. But no, I'm glad, and again, I'm glad that you at least are you going to be there this year at
Which one?
New York Comic Con? Are you going to be at that one?
Actually, no, they treated me very shabbily the last 2 years. Let's
I'm
not
sorry,
get into
man.
that, but yeah, no, I fuck those guys.
Yeah,
I'm no
fuck those
longer
guys
going to.
indeed. Hey,
Yeah,
listen, sadly, Dennis, I know a lot of other older creators that are in that boat, so
yeah,
I sympathize. Um, Two young guys, and sadly, we lost one of these guys last year, and I wondered if they ever had a chance to talk to you. Ed Pisker, who passed away, and
yeah,
his cartoon kayfabe guy, another Pittsburgh guy, and a good friend of mine, Jimmy Rugg. Yeah, what are your thoughts on those guys?
yeah. I didn't know Ed well, but I was on a couple of panels with him, in recent years, and I was on the kayfabe podcast uh, maybe 3 years ago or so.
Sure, sure.
And yeah, I like those guys. They seem like they really did their homework, and clearly, well, I mean, it's like you don't do this unless you love comics, right? But
Yeah,
yeah, it
no,
was sad to see Ed felt he had to off himself. The whole thing
yeah,
is just, it's I get both sides of that. I just
sure.
think it's very sad that that couldn't have been handled a different way, you know? And once he was kind of canceled, he thought comics were his life. He didn't have anything to live for, and that's sad also.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, it's tragic.
This cancel culture is a new wrinkle that I think, and again, you'll forgive me. Tell me if there were similarities, because obviously, and I want to ask about the creation of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, but that's different. But first, let's talk about cancel
Sure.
culture, and yeah, your thoughts on that. And again, did you encounter anything similar to that?
Well, no, and I want to say maybe even surprisingly, but no, the politics were different then. My generation had a common enemy. The common enemy was largely the government then, by people like Richard Nixon and
Oh
Lyndon
yeah,
Johnson, and
oh yeah,
the people who were dragging us into the war in Vietnam and whatnot. And so they were the common enemy. We were not really sniping at each other in any significant degree. Of course, there's always a little infighting and whatnot, but no, we saw ourselves as us versus them. Today, it's different. Today, it's within the same generation. Those who are not up to the task of being politically correct or perfect, and also judged in a way that to me oftentimes seems unfair. You're judging people by standards that are not universal standards necessarily, or that at least are open to debate. I want to see more debate and less, you know, you're out of the gene pool. But what the CBLDF was started because we had problems with the establishment, and the case that started it all was a shop in suburban Illinois getting busted in the late 80s by
Lansing, yeah,
basically a couple of beat cops who we later learned were biased in the sense one of them was very religious, and I know this because the local newspaper account quoted him as saying when he walked into the shop, he saw satanic items in the shop. Now, that is not a legal term. So far as I know, you cannot arrest someone for selling satanic comics. But so it was a personal vendetta. We also found out this was a white suburb, and the manager was a mixed race person who we think was also kind of being bullied into, we don't want you in our town. So there are a
Yep.
lot of layers to that. But officially, we had to fight the case based on the fact that we thought their First Amendment rights had been violated. And at the local level, the owner of the shop, not the manager, he hired a local attorney who was not an expert in First Amendment law. She lost that case. That's when I came in and decided I'm going to raise some money. We got to appeal this. This is a terrible precedent. And so we were successful doing that. And that's how the CBLDF started and became a permanent organization. And so most of the time, maybe all the time in those early years, it was an overzealous prosecutor or a cop who was trying to bully someone he didn't like, or something of a more institutional adversarial situation, not so much someone our own age criticizing what someone drew or said. And you have to remember, part of that comes from my generation coming out of the Eisenhower generation when nobody said anything. It was like, the aftermath of the McCarthy era.
Yes. Yes.
And so just the fact that we wanted to do comics that could utilize four-letter words or nudity or just talk about things that were not supposed to be talked about, that was kind of a revolutionary thing. And every generation, deals with it in their own way. I can't imagine what somebody, a teenager now growing up in the second Trump era who wants to be a cartoonist, how they're going to wield their pen or their mouse. I hope I live long enough to see some masterpieces come out of it, but it's up to each generation, to yell at who it has to yell at. It's the nature of satire. It's the nature of humor. It's the nature of politics. And I hope cartoonists, continue to dip their pen and not be cowed, because a lot of people are cowed right now.
Agreed. I also, and again, Dennis, my politics, I always consider myself a classic liberal. It concerns me, and especially based on what happened in the most recent presidential election, that there is this backlash towards people on the extreme left, just as we had that. I always would tell my younger nephews when they would love something that was so obviously like a corporate or where, I'm like, no, that's the man. You're a teenager, you're supposed to be against the man, but now there's a backlash towards people that I understandably want representation and inclusion and all the DEI that I agree with on paper and really in practice, but
Yeah.
there is this backlash to that. And now in the same, almost a reverse McCarthyism of from the left to the people that may not agree with them of, well, hey, you don't agree with me, well, then I have no time for you, in the same way that the establishment didn't for the people that were just looking for free speech and inclusion back then. Your thoughts,
Well,
again, as someone that's observed these cultural changes.
no, I totally agree. I mean, censorship can come from any direction, and it's still censorship. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I,
it's
I
like
see the shrug. I see the
yeah,
shrug, Dennis. Believe me, I feel the same way.
it's early on when I was getting to know Harvey Kurtzman, and I remember complaining to him about something of this nature, and he very calmly said to me, "It's the pendulum." He said, "The pendulum swings, and it can only swing so far, and then it has to swing the other way,
Sure.
and then it swings too far." and then it has to swing the other way. He said, the world, this is the way it's run. And at first I thought, well, that's kind of simplistic, but there is a certain truth to it. You
Yeah.
can only go so far, and inevitably it swings back. And it seldom just stops in the middle. It's always
Yeah. Yeah.
moving. And so, depending on who you are and where you were born and what age you are, you're going to be caught up one way or the other. And you may switch sides, and you may
Yeah.
change your opinion or or whatever. But the key is tolerance. And what we don't have today, it's, to state the obvious, we don't have a dialogue. We have two sides that like
Indeed.
loathe each other with a fury. And I get it. I certainly do. But my God, we can't have a civilization if we can't start finding some middle ground.
I do. I'm with you. Absolutely, man. No,
It's
again, I
it's going
wonder.
to be easy.
No, it's not easy. And again, I appreciate. Again, you've got more perspective than me because you've been around longer than me. And well, it's the truth, man.
Well,
And yeah, well, and again, that's why I'm glad you're still out there. And I doing the three. Is this the first time you've done a 3D comic?
no. I mean, I published 3D in the past.
Sure,
Picture
sure.
printed several. I have been experimenting with it, and I've been doing some adaptations for like posters mostly. This will be the first book of my own art in 3D.
Okay.
And in fact, I just had a meeting with the local dispensary. Weed is legal in Massachusetts, and my favorite dispensary wants to carry the 3D stuff because they think it's
Sure.
good stoner entertainment. So
Indeed.
if it does well there, we'll probably start branching out.
It's so
So
great, Dennis. Honestly, Dennis, I swear,
yeah,
it's legal in Illinois now too.
yeah.
And me and my friends that have smoked, when it was still underground, we thought we'd have to wait until, frankly, that we would be your current age. And we were so stunned that they did it. Isn't it interesting? Again, as a head shop guy and a former guy that grew up in that hippie generation and stuff, what are your like? Is it that's great, or are you stunned that we're getting
Well,
it that it's loosening up?
I think it's mostly great, and in part I say because this is a case where I think regulation is good because the weed is grown where somebody's actually making sure it's not sprayed with paraquat or some chemical you don't want to smoke. Back in the day, when I would buy a lid from somebody who got it from a guy who got it from a guy, and he would say, "Oh, this is Acapulco gold," but you didn't know.
Sure,
You
sure.
bought it on faith. Unless the guy grew it in his closet with a grow light, you didn't know. And there are many times I fear, I might have smoked something and it was had chemicals in it and whatnot.
Oh yeah,
I know that, Nixon was spraying Mexican crops with paraquat, and that didn't mean the Mexicans growing it didn't cut it down and back it up, that
sure.
wasn't going to ruin their profit. So that part I think is excellent. The other part is, I perfected the art of rolling weed, but I sure prefer to buy them pre-rolled, and they're beautiful, and uh,
I'm with you.
and I like the variety, and I
Indeed.
like gummies now and then. So
Sure.
yeah, for an old hippie, I like the convenience store part of it. Yeah.
I'm with you, man. No, and truly, again, yeah, I worked at a rock radio station for 15 years, and
Oh,
it was founded by hippies. WXRT, if you remember XRT, if your Midwest years.
that
Uh,
sounds familiar.
They
Yeah.
started in the 70s. They started in the
Yeah.
70s stuff,
Okay.
but yeah, in the for most of the 90s and into the 2000s, I worked for
Okay.
them and stuff. So yeah, believe me, and again, I know a lot of former hippies that are like, I can't believe that I can walk into a store legally, and as you say, it's safer now. The different blends and then I don't if you want indica, if you want
Absolutely.
sativa. So yeah, I'm absolutely with you. I know, strange new
So
world, Dennis.
yeah, so I mean, we can complain about a lot of things, and we do, but that's one area where I think there's progress in at least what a third of the states, maybe.
Yeah,
Uh, Wisconsin's still being stupid about it, but it's
yeah.
fun. When I left Wisconsin, it was a very progressive state. I don't know what happened.
I hear you, man.
Now we
Oh,
got Ron Johnson and all kinds of
ugh.
fools in charge, and
Oh, when Scott Walker was the governor, for Christ's sake,
yeah.
and he cut out the unions and everything.
Well, we probably
Sad.
we are digressing, aren't we?
Well, but forgive me, Dennis, but it's the milieu that your product and
Yeah.
everything came from, and that's why I was curious to hear what you think. That's you know,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's true. You cannot really separate underground comics from the culture that spawned them.
yeah,
And and I think my generation smoking weed and thinking, what can I say, deeply about some things and being maybe idealistic in some areas, it caused us to set up our comics business in a more egalitarian way than the role models we had. And that had an effect. It had a domino effect. It once people who worked for DC and Marvel and the big companies, once they found out that these kids were, you know, getting royalties, getting their art back, all this stuff, there were complaints. I got this firsthand when Stan Lee gave me carte blanche to do that comics book magazine in 73 or 4.
yes,
Um, it was kind of naive of him because he said, yeah, you'll get your art back. You want to use some 4-letter words, okay, a little nudity, don't get carried away with it. And the next thing he knew, all the guys in the bullpen were saying, Stan, why are you giving these long-haired guys all these perks that we don't have? And that's when he realized, oh, he couldn't separate them. The Pandora was out of the box. So his quick solution was he killed my magazine, which, but it didn't stop the Pandora effect.
yeah,
And so the companies gradually had to change. And DC, I think, was the first. Paul Levitt started developing a royalty system, even for guys back in the 40s who never thought they'd see another dime. They started to get a piece of 5% of every reprint. And so it had a ripple effect. And that's one of the things I'm proudest of is it wasn't just for us. So it shows if you're young and you're in this whatever comics or anything, and you're kind of hitting your head against the wall, don't give up on having an effect. It might not happen overnight, but have a plan, have something that's not, you know, dumb or, half cocked. Have a reasonable plan, stick with it, and you may find that you change the status quo in ways that are significant. You
did
got
you make two of
faith.
those? Did you make two of those Marvel books, or
There were actually 5 issues.
wow?
Three that Marvel published, and I had 2 in the can when Stan axed it. And I said, "Well, what about the 2 in the can?" And he said, "Oh, you can publish those."
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Were
So,
they
like
were
I said, he was a good guy in my experience.
That's cool. Were they all like original ideas, or were they parodies of Marvel characters?
We never did parody Marvel. No.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
I think because we just want to do our own
Sure.
thing. Would we
Sure.
have eventually parodied them? I imagine, but
Well, and I know they had like Not Brand Eck, which was kind
yeah,
of their Mad Magazine and everything,
exactly.
so I understand.
And
But yeah, I was
it would
wondering.
have, yeah, it almost would have looked kind of, I don't know,
Like
like we
shitting
were
on the man.
obliged to
Yeah.
do it or something. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I almost
But
thought too, like biting the hand that is extending itself the way Stan did to say initially, yeah, sure, publish this
yeah,
stuff. And hey, what are you doing to my characters, man? I thought I was being a nice guy, let you in, you know.
I did parody him in the first issue. I drew him as if he were J. Jonah Jameson. Um,
Well, that's not too far.
so,
Better hair on Stan in the. Oh well, I don't know how much of it was a wig because I know he was
yeah.
losing his hair pretty early
Well,
'60s or whatever. So
there's a collection. My imprint at Dark Horse put one out about, I don't know, 6, 8 years ago. I can't remember, called The Best of Comics book. And Stan actually wrote an intro for it. And I was surprised. In his intro, he said that it was one of the things he was most proud of, which kind of surprised me. but I think it's because he was willing to do something completely different and bend the rules. Um,
Yeah. I'm interested, and again, because well, first of all, are those Marvel comics? Are they part of the documentary? Are they in the story for the documentary?
I don't, well, they're still coming up for another shoot, and I
Oh,
don't,
okay.
it's a good question. I don't recall talking about that with them, but I think it'll come up because I know Stan and my relationship with Stan is on the agenda. We just haven't gotten to it yet.
So there's footage and everything of Stan. I mean, that's the great thing of what I've been able to see from the Kickstarter campaign. And the trailer, by the way, everybody, is out on YouTube. So if this conversation isn't convincing you, oddly compelling, the Dennis Kitchen story trailer, you can find that on YouTube, and it's a good representation of what everybody's trying to put together for this movie. So, and I know that there is archival footage of Kurtzman and Eisner, which is great to hear that that will be part of the story as well. But yeah, so yeah. I mean, and again, it seems like you've kind of explained your feelings about Stan. Yeah, is there anything else you wanted to add about Stan Lee?
I mean, what can one say that hasn't already been said? I would just say working with him was always pleasant. There are people who will diss Stan for various reasons, and
Sure,
they have their own voice and opinion, but
sure.
I I can't say anything really negative about him. He was a gentleman when I worked with him.
When that Eisner Miller book of conversations came out that Dark Horse put out years
Yeah.
ago, I always found Eisner's observation that Stan was more of a promoter, he felt, than a creator per se. And
Well, yeah. I mean, you can't. He obviously was a writer and an
yes,
accomplished and prolific one. But yes,
sure,
will sometimes use the term carnival barker
yes,
in a way that sounds like it might be demeaning, but he meant it in a positive way. Like
okay,
comics didn't really have promoters. 90 some percent of cartoonists are kind of wallflowers who work at home and
sure.
they're shy. They're like they're not self promoters by nature. And the fact that Stan was out there, um, certainly promoting himself, but comics in general benefited from it. So, yeah.
Did you did you feel that the underground was benefited by Stan being out there? I mean, of course, he was famously going to the
Well,
colleges as well and
keep
talking to
keep in
kids.
mind that by the time I worked with Stan in the 73 or 74,
Yes.
undergrounds were having a crisis at that point, distribution crisis, and Stan
Mm.
actually saved at least my company. I don't know if
Wow.
he saved undergrounds in general, but we were in tough shape when he called. He had offered me jobs before, and I always said no, and it drove him crazy because I, under normal circumstances, would have said sure, but I had my own thing. I wasn't going to stop my own thing and move to New York. But when he called me during that crisis, I said, yeah, let's talk, because at that point, yeah, I needed a lifeline and he provided it.
That's great, man. That's great. Well, listen, I we can wrap up. I really appreciate that this project is happening, and I really appreciate the fact that you are out there still contributing. And that is the title of the 3D book. Is it also oddly compelling, or is it
No, no, no. I think the provisional title is Depths of Perception.
Aldous Huxley, right?
Well, it's a play on the word. I
Yeah,
think his was
Doors, Doors
Doors
of
to Perception.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Okay, very cool.
So,
Well, again, that's I'm of that George Carlin belief too. That
yeah.
a little spice certainly helps broaden the mind, and I feel that that has happened to me from my
Well,
own
good.
personal experience. So, you know,
Well, good. Thank you, John. This has been a fun hour. Appreciate it.
well, and truly, it's been my pleasure, Dennis, and I hope
Right.
to see you soon. So, thanks a lot for talking to me today.
You bet. Good night.